All right, welcome folks to the November 6th, 2017 Kubernetes SIG Apps meeting. I will go ahead and into chat here, I will share the document where we record our meeting minutes and all that other fun stuff. And so I've shared that into chat with today's November 6th, as I said. I'm Matt Farina, so when you see SIG Apps in the thing, that's who is talking. And so with that, we'll jump into the agenda here. There are a whole bunch of announcements, so I'm going to walk through some of them, and there might be others who added some who want to dig in a little bit to it, so I'll see if you're here. The first one is the meeting time and time zones. So some of you may have noticed that what's on the community page refers to an hour earlier because it's set in UTC, and yet the meeting started at a different time. We kind of, around these daylight savings time zone changes, have a little bit of shuffle. Instead of going, but yet if you go to the Kubernetes calendar at kubernetes.io/community, it had a different time. It actually says 9 a.m. Pacific because that calendar is set to Pacific time. And that's when the meeting invite is set for. And so I kept it today as the meeting time that the meeting was set for, figuring people would show up for that, rather than the shift on the community repo. And because we have such a presence in the Pacific time zone, we'll probably keep that. And so it's going to be 9 a.m. Pacific time. We'll update the community repo today. I know it gets a little weird setting around and positioning around that kind of time zone. If anybody's got an issue with that, I'm happy to discuss it. But 8 a.m. Pacific time is a little early since we do have a lot of people over there engaged for them to get on. They tend not to show up if we hold a meeting at that time. The next one is, you'll see a link to, there is another, I wanted to share this real briefly. I know people are working on Go apps that interface with Kubernetes, and there is another Go client that's been talked about in the community a bit lately. And so I wanted to just share that with folks to go take a look at. Eventually, we'll probably be curious to talk more about it, but I just wanted to throw that out there. The next one is the app definition working group update. I wanted to just give a quick update on this because we had our first official meeting as the app definition working group. And the things to give is we spent a little bit of time focusing on what are the goals of this working group, just to clarify it. So that way we don't go off the rails or go into all kinds of other places. In addition to that, Antoine had a demo on a way to kind of organize applications. He implemented it through a CRD. I think it was called packages. And so there was a demo there. It was not recorded, so unfortunately I don't have a link to it. The goals that we came to in that we're still iterating on are to help drive the actual completion of issues with regard to like the SIG CLI interfaces, so things like apply and dry run and some of these things that are currently in kube control. How do we help facilitate them with some of their goals? The second one is to do a survey and pool of examples to provide guidance for folks who want to do app definition things, to try to understand the personas, what are the needs, and where are we going with it. And then the third one, which we haven't dove into very much, is to look at interoperability between tools. And some of the conversation since then has even said, how do we look at what the UX is, where the needs are right now in order to help learn, in order to drive that interoperability. And so those are kind of the three goals we're going to shoot for. And that's what happened in the first meeting. It'll be another week and a half before we have the next one. Then the next two, and I don't know if somebody else is here to talk about it, but I'll talk about it with KubeCon. We have two SIG Apps meetings at KubeCon. One is Thursday, December 7th, which will be an update. That'll be a half an hour long, and it's similar to the updates we give in community. So we'll be kind of highlighting everything that's going on there. And then the next one is on Friday the 8th. We also have a deep dive session that'll serve as an in-person meeting to kind of dig in much deeper. And so if you're interested in SIG Apps and you're going to be there, please look at attending. And then the third one, and is somebody here to talk about the Telepresence team announcement?
Could you send them up, please? Thank you.
Hi, Dan Kahn's here.
Did you add the Telepresence team one on here?
Oh, sorry. No, I was going lower down on the.
Oh yeah, no, I'm still up in the announcement. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I'm out of order. Apologies.
Sorry. Yeah, no, that's all right. And so the Telepresence, Yeah, there's one on here. I'll just read it. It says the Telepresence team is testing a more robust method that proxies a local container to your remote container for fast development. They'd be interested in feedbacks, and there's a docs link here. So if folks want to take a look into that, I'm not familiar with it. It was just something they obviously added here to talk about.
So I was going to add as well for KubeCon, there's also the Contributor Summit that's on the Tuesday. So I at least got an invite to that. I'd pitched like an open space around like some things that are relevant to SIG apps, so like tooling and sort of app dev stuff.
Yeah, the Contributor Summit, and they understand that this is doesn't scale with the way our community is going, so they're reevaluating it. At first, there was invitation sent out to a number of people, and then they're going to go towards kind of a lottery. And I'm not exactly sure of the details of that. If you're interested, we can probably find out more for you, or you might be able to find out more by using Google. But that's why some folks here may not be aware of it, but that is on the Tuesday before. Does anybody have any other announcements or anything before we get into our topics? All right, so the first one we have up here before the demo and our discussion topics is I got a short discussion on here for the clients and SDKs. These are formally owned by API machinery when it comes to generating things and stuff like that, but they haven't had much time to actually dig into the UX or the implementation or the other things. And so now ideas have been thrown out about a SIG SDK or a working group or something like that to try to improve them. There's also work being done, like I shared earlier in the meeting, with another Go client, and there's actually a number of clients out there. There's one for Python that are in the community, things like that. And so there's talk now about how do we kind of attack this problem and where do we go with it to have better shared tooling. And so without getting into the going and actually building it, is there anybody here or around, or do we know folks who are actually interested in how do we organize around that and work together on it for that shared tooling? Because we already have like a Kubernetes-client org, and there's some open API work being done there. Is there anybody here who's actually interested in jumping over there and helping? I can plug you into the right place. You can reach out offline, but that's kind of what I wanted to talk about was how did we SIG apps want to engage in that? Does anybody have any ideas?
I'm definitely interested, although I just sent a private message to Anthony by mistake.
Yeah, so I've been following. I tend to stick around sort of SIG apps and SIG API machinery, so I've been following a lot of the client work. Partly as well, I've been with the Kubernetes JSON schema stuff, finding bugs in the Swagger specifications, which a lot of the clients are using, but I haven't had much time to do anything more active. I think there's like one of the things that's cropped up there as well is the sort of the weird sort of first class nature of the Go client, which I think is sort of like one of the reasons why I think we probably see a lot of tools written in Go in SIG apps is because of like it's just easier from a client perspective, because they're not generated via the external Swagger stuff at the moment. They're sort of a weird vendor bits of Kubernetes.
Yeah, and it changes with every release of Kubernetes. You get a major API breaking release, which the best I've heard is people taking hours to upgrade. Some people take days to weeks. Yeah, it's because it's staged and it's supposed to be synced out and designed to be separate. Even though actually pulling it out, I believe, is currently on hold while other work is being done.
Is there any like
one of the best?
Go ahead.
I think one of the best things we can do here is try to provide we've always had this notion of what our promise is in terms of supporting backward compatibility and supporting an API version once it's released. But we also have a promise with respect to how long we're going to leave something in beta before we promote it to stable. And we've been a little bit lax on that. So one thing we can do for all clients in general is try to get the APIs that we're responsible for to a stable version within a reasonable time frame, so that you don't have to upgrade your client with every major release because we made backward incompatible changes and moved group versions.
Yeah, that would be nice. That'll probably take us, even with the workgroup APIs, it'll be a while before those are all across the supported Kubernetes versions, because Kubernetes supports 3 minor versions at a time, so 1.8, 1.7, and 1.6. So,
and honestly, even though we're going to advance to V1 and 1.9, we're not going to remove the extensions V1 Beta 1 in the very near future anyway. So that's going to be something we continue to support, just so people who are built against it can move forward. But at least, like, the sooner we can get things to a stable point, the less likely we are to break people as we modify the API.
Yeah. For anybody who doesn't know, the API policy says that an API in beta, once you get to V1, will be around for 6 months or 2 releases, is how it's worded, something like that. Okay, so but this is really talking about Go, and I think an important point was brought up earlier that a lot of folks like to write applications that interact with stuff in other languages, Python, Ruby, a number of different languages, and so just having CLIs and an SDK or client in Go that's a first class probably isn't all that we want or need. And so who's interested in helping get some of this other stuff going, and how do we organize around that to enable folks? Because I'll bet you if we had a good flow of how to get something going in, say, JavaScript, a bunch of Node.js people might be interested in jumping on board to help contribute to that, who maybe aren't part of the normal Kubernetes crowd who's working on Kubernetes, because we've given them a nice channel to get in to contribute to something meaningful to them.
Medi has a Python client that's actually fairly full-featured and pretty good. And then the Java client that we use, the Spark, is, I mean, not bad. It's not as great as the Go client, but I mean, there are definitely some communities of interest that already exist around supporting other languages.
So go ahead.
Matt, to your point, Matt, like what, I guess what's the next step here? Is there already a SIG that's talking about this, or is this looking to kind of organize that effort?
There's been a little talk in a few SIGs about how do we organize the effort. I think that API Machinery technically owns this, although I don't know where the line between client and SDK and all of that falls, but they just haven't had much time on it. They're busy, and you've got to have people who are interested in working on that. I mean, this is open source. And so because this touches SIG apps, I'm gauging interest because it might be worth going through there and just saying, okay, how do we make it easier for people who are not currently contributors to get involved, because this is a problem for them and they want to engage?
So I presume he's not on this call, but I think the person who's been most active on this in the SIG app space has been Mehdi from Google.
Yeah.
I know from his point of view, he was he's actually come up with a whole scheme of badging for the different clients in terms of where they are from a maturity point of view. So if you actually go into the if you go look at all the different clients, they have these sort of Kubernetes client GitHub badges, and they're either in sort of alpha, beta, or sort of done, or I think there's then the silver, gold, and bronze set. Yeah, alpha, beta, stable, and there's an adjacent bronze, silver, gold sort of set of badges. There are, I think, sort of bronze alpha badges for bronze alpha clients for a whole bunch of languages, including JavaScript and others. However, having them all so they can all be automatically generated from all of the Swagger definitions, and having all of that then have an interface that feels native to people is sort of quite a bit of a challenge. But Mehdi's the sort of person who's had, I think, most of the experience there.
I'm definitely interested in helping out. I guess my question is, what are the next steps? Like, how to get this ball rolling?
Well, I think the next step is to get the people who are interested together, just connected to figure out what the next steps are, and to work with. You said, wait, who did you say it was? Mehdi?
Yeah. It's let me link to the library. He's basically the top contributor on client Python. So He's been working on this, and we're interested in supporting, like Google is interested in supporting other language, but I think it's like you said, we haven't had a lot of developer bandwidth to apply to the problem. Another thing we might want to do before you start work is decide which languages, like prioritize the set of languages that we want to support in terms of clients. Because there are many, many, many languages and very, very few developers, and we should probably, if we're going to focus as a community on supporting clients outside of Golang, decide which are the most important languages instead of trying to get contributors to build something ad hoc.
So I maybe a different way to say this though is not to say what do we have to do like a company providing them, but we've got a community of people who are developing apps. How do we enable people who are in that community who are not current contributors today, who are interested in these problems, to know there's a place to get involved and to get involved? Because I don't want to say, okay, this is an extra burden on people who are already busy today. I want to look at it and say, there's a whole lot of app developers who are struggling with these problems. If they're interested in it, maybe they who don't contribute today are willing to work together to solve this common problem for them. Because there's a lot more app developers out there who write stuff that talk to APIs than even show up here regularly.
I think that makes good sense. Like
And
our team's been doing a lot of work writing apps for Kubernetes, and it would be better if we could have a place to kind of communicate about these things, and just a common place to even talk about it and bring the efforts together.
Yeah, and I'm thinking, is there a way to facilitate that rather than trying to do something else? The client Python. Okay.
And there's client Java as well. Mehdi's been kind of working on both of those. So, and there may be a bunch more out there. These are two that I know that are actually in use by other projects and that people have externally started to contribute to already. So those are like, if you're a Java developer or a Python developer and you're looking to pitch in, those are some things that you could start with like right now.
Okay. That's good. I didn't realize these two were here. So I think the next step is probably to get with him and to get with some more folks in SIG API machinery to figure out how do we start enabling this stuff, or how do we come up with a plan to do it? Because I really don't want to ask more people who are already really busy to take on more work. So anybody who's interested, and I grabbed a couple of names here, we'll try and just start looping a few people together over the coming weeks, not like this week or next week, but the coming weeks, to figure out how do we attack this problem.
Should we just like put email addresses or something in the?
Yeah, if you want to give email addresses in here, that'll work.
Cool, thanks.
Thanks. All right, then we can go on to, is there anything else folks wanted to talk to about this one? Nope, all right. Then I think that next up is we have a demo. Let me find the tab. We have a demo, Canary deployments. Do we have somebody on to talk about that? Do we have Tom? Are you there?
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Great, fantastic.
All
Thank
right.
you very much for having me, guys.
Yeah, thanks. The floor is yours.
Great. So I, last week, created a tutorial for doing Canary deployments on Kubernetes. Some people liked it and wanted to learn more. So what I've done is automated the process. So what I wanted to do, let me click. Oh, sorry, there we go. Slides are there. What I've done is made an automated CI/CD pipeline using Canary deployments on Kubernetes. The basics of this were outlined in the tutorial I made last week. But what I wanted to do is integrate Jenkins, Grafana, and Prometheus to automate the process for not only deploying, but issuing rollbacks when things don't go well. So our current pipeline is to push to a Canary branch on GitHub, have Jenkins listen for those events, build a new Docker image with the updated application, deploy a Canary version of our deployment, have that get deployed to Kubernetes, and have Prometheus and Grafana then scrape metrics from that new deployment and maybe potentially fire alerts depending upon whether things don't go well. So that's the overall pipeline. When things get merged into master, we'll update that Docker image, and we will delete the Canary application. So right now I have the current baseline up and running from that Canary app. So so if people have a terminal, they can start watching the responses, or you can see it here. It's a very simple application that scrapes the environment inside of Kubernetes to look for particular labels and that are present on the pod. So we get returned a JSON object that has the pod name, what app the application is running in, i.e. what deployment, a label for the release version, and on master, that release will be tagged as stable, and on a Canary branch should be tagged as Canary. And then any additional labels that are in the that are on the pod, and here we see I appended the git commit for that particular one. Here we can see the pods running in the namespace. We do notice that there's a slight bug that the namespace value is not being populated, and we're going to run through how we might issue a Canary deployment, check to make sure that works right, and then merge into master. Are there any questions about the setup generally? Great. So with that, we can run through the Jenkins file to just kind of get a better understanding about what is happening. It's a very basic outline. We're going to check out our source. We are going to run tests against the Go package. We are going to build and push our Docker image. And then we are going to do something with Kubernetes. I've used some shell commands to replace values inside of our deployment.yaml file that is in our Git repo, and then apply this with a basic kubectl command, very similar to the tutorial from before. In the Canary version, we make sure that we replace the app name with appinfo canary, and we only have one replica instead of 3, and we set this release to be Canary instead of stable. And then for the master, we're just updating the Docker image. So it's a pretty straight setup. A lot of it was taken from another tutorial that GCP provided on doing this, and it's a very similar process. So if we look in our app info service, we see that there's the problem lines here, that we're not pulling the namespace value correctly from the environment variable that we're passing in. We also have this timeout that we've commented out. And this is going to simulate, when we uncomment this, a poorly performing Canary deployment where responses are coming back correctly, but maybe your SLO times are 2 seconds response, and this is going to guarantee a 3-second response. So we're going to simulate what happens here when we issue a version of the Canary that doesn't meet our requirements. Yep, I was doing this before. So what we've done is we've checked out a version, new branch on our app repository. We pushed it to the Canary branch. GitHub has notified Jenkins that there is now a new version of the Canary. It is going through and building. As we see this conclude its build, we should see a change in the responses here to show that there is now a Canary. Oh, we see over here on the pod side that we have a Canary version of our pod. And we saw that this changed back from the Canary. There we go. So we're seeing that automatically we've issued a Canary. We haven't had to change our service URL, and we're seeing our updated responses. This is the Grafana page. It's going to be in the repo that kind of documents this entire tutorial. it's showing the response time for the different app info backends, the stable version and the Canary version. And right now there's only a stable version, hasn't been scraped by Prometheus yet, but as we get updates, great, we see that there is now a version that has a Canary release tag that is taking over 3 seconds, which is very significant. We see this alert, this graph down here has an alert built into it that if it goes over 2 seconds, which was our fake SLO, it's going to fire an event. So if we look back, the event that gets fired is actually just a Jenkins job called Canary rollback, which is very simple, and it just fired, ran 12 seconds ago. And if we look, we now no longer have our app info Canary deployment. That was deleted, and all these are coming back from the stable. So if we want to go and fix our Canary deployment the right way without a sleep, we'll have an update. Canary is going to be rebuilding. Now the rollback feature I put in as a Jenkins build. It doesn't have to be that. It could be some sort of other script that could be run. I just wanted to kind of consolidate the stack that I was using to kind of leverage the same pieces. And that Jenkins run can also be manually run if things aren't looking right, but they don't meet some alert mechanism that's built into your monitoring system. Ooh, last failure. Live demo. I've done this like 8 times, and every time I forget to unimport the time file. We'll try that again. Thank you for your patience. Now this middle graph here will document any error responses that come back from the service, and we don't show any of them happening here, but that might also be another SLO that's important to you guys, making sure that you have 200 response codes some percentage of the time. Now we can look at the responses coming in. We see our Canary deployment come in. We're seeing the proper namespace value get populated when Canary's there. We'll start seeing our response times go down once it gets enough data to get a new version. We see the little green down here is a different version. You can see the git commit is this extra label on the metric here. And that's the new one that just came out, and you can see it's exceptionally small. So things are looking good. So at whichever point the ops team is comfortable with this release, they would then be able to issue a pull request to track that. So we will do just that. And we're not going to squash and merge here because that would rewrite the Canary branch, and then you'd have a race conditions between the updated Canary build getting run and the master build getting run, and master would try to delete the Canary app, and the Canary build would try to deploy a new version of the Canary. So you can't really do that and then we'll successfully delete our Canary branch. We'll see Jenkins start our master build. We'll jump back here. And then as this gets deployed, we should see the correct namespace value getting populated when release is stable, not just when release is Canary. And then we'll see the Canary, let's it's already terminating. And here we see stable and default correctly populated with the updated Git. So that pretty much wraps up the demo. Do people have questions on that?
Sorry, maybe I missed this at the beginning. Are you currently using this in your production environment?
No, it is a prototype just demonstrating how one might do Canary deployments in Kubernetes using different deployments behind a single service.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the demo.
Is the code that you use to fire off all these jobs and do the automation for Jenkins available somewhere?
Yes, I will post it in chat, and I'll update the page as well. I'm going through and trying to make it more readable. There's a lot of steps in setting up and configuring a lot of this in Jenkins and Grafana, so I just wanted to go through that again. So I've updated it in chat.
Thank you.
And then in the drive.
Yeah, because Canary builds are something that a lot of folks will want to get into. And so, yeah, so the demo actually leads into a discussion for a little bit on how to do, Canary deployments on Kubernetes. What's the best way to deal with this?
Yeah, so I wanted to get a lot of people's feedback. We don't use Kubernetes yet in production. We're on a marathon stack right now, and we're trying to move away from that for obvious reasons. So from trying to figure out how to do the things we do there on Kubernetes, it seems like a lot of people have been using third-party tools. Istio is a common one for controlling your Canary deployments, and there's a good, or I thought it was an interesting presentation by Kelsey Hightower on Istio and Kubernetes, where he does Canary deployments, just giving mobile apps access to the new Canary all in Istio and not having to worry about the Kubernetes side of things and managing deployments. Do people use Kubernetes raw? Do they do third-party tools, or do they not do Canary deployments?
Well, it's this is Scott speaking. It's interesting that we're on a SIG Apps call, and I keep thinking that when I'm looking at demos like this, I'm wondering when the origin of the demo is from. Like the code, for instance, from the Jenkins file. At this point, I have two thoughts. One is it might be interesting to if you're going to use Jenkins to use pipeline, just so that you can use Blue Ocean and some of the more sorry, use some of the more up-to-date Jenkins like loveliness if you're going to use it. And secondly, I was wondering if you adapted this to use a chart, Hellman charts. Would that kind of just overcomplicate your demo, or do you think that that would be a good way, maybe a good next step for moving this, I guess, Canary demo into something more up to date? Yeah.
Agreed. The infrastructure can be complicated in setting up, and I did use Helm for the first time trying to set up and deploy Prometheus and Grafana and Jenkins. There were some things I had to modify slightly to get working, and I think it worked well because I took Minikube first and stood it up locally, and then I really wanted the GitHub notifications working so that I didn't have to go manually run things, because I know that always looks poor in the demo. So I did stand it up on GKE after that, and I walked through the outline that I posted in that Cade's Automated Canary GitHub, and I think a lot of it was pretty straightforward, but there's always things you go back and you try to figure out, well, when do I need to do that? So I'd love someone else to walk through that and see if they get the same end result that I got, just to make sure that it's repeatable. And for someone who's used Jenkins in the past, we're a Bamboo shop in-house, and I didn't want to buy a Bamboo license for some public demo. I'd love to get your feedback on how that could have been improved and best practices there. I'm not a Jenkins person.
Cool.
there's one other alternative type of Canary and staged rollout that I've seen with deployments that's also prevalent. So you're creating a new deployment for your Canary and then updating the main deployment after you're satisfied with the health of that Canary. The other way I've seen this done is to have statically sized deployments. So like you might have a deployment that has one in it, that's your Canary. Then you have a deployment that's got like 10% of the fleet, which is like a staged rollout. Then you've got another deployment, which is the other like 89% of your fleet. And rather than create a new deployment, they just apply an update to the Canary first when they're satisfied with that, and they update the deployment that represents 10%, and they update the larger one when they're satisfied after they've taken 10% of it. Any thoughts to doing it that way or this way, or why you choose this to do it by creating a new deployment as opposed to the more statically partitioned way?
No real reason. From my end, I thought it made it clear when the deployment was active and not, based on the presence of that deployment object in Kubernetes. So from my end, seeing the change in state of the cluster was easier using a brand new deployment rather than updating versions along that end. One thing that would be nice about either of those is kind of having this automated rollout or upgrading of the Canary deployment could happen regularly as like a nightly build. And you've got in your requirements doc, it's got to work for a day, and then it gets staged up to the next one, and it's a 3-day rollout or whatever you're required to do. It's nice when it's just a present deployment there that you can update rather than having to do checks to make sure whether it's present or not, or treat things differently depending on what state it's in.
And just a very quick sidebar on that, or piggyback on that, is it kind of depends on what type of app you're deploying, right? If you're talking about a stateless app, that's, staged builds have a totally different meaning than if you have a stateful app that has shared live data.
Mm-hmm.
With stateful applications, though, you probably shouldn't be using deployments. You probably want to use a stateful set, and there are other ways you can go about doing a Canary with a stateful set.
Has anybody documented an example of a Canary with a stateful set?
Yeah, the community documentation for stateful set, when we added rolling update, documents how to do staged rollouts and Canary updates on stateful set using the partition. And then there was a presentation in SIG Apps when the same infrastructure was used to implement lifecycle hooks for stateful sets. And there's an open proposal for lifecycle hooks based on that as well.
Do you have links, Anthony? That sounds awesome.
This is actually Kenneth. Anthony and I we're sharing a mic, but sure, I can give you links to the community docs and to the proposal, which may also link back to the SIG Apps demo that was given.
Got it. Cool.
Is there any plan to do the same staging rollout that we have in stateful set, implement that in deployments as well?
It's still under discussion, but there's been multiple attempts to do that type of auto pause with deployment in daemon set. Stateful set offers a much more clear semantic in terms of when to pause. Given the way that expectations work inside of deployment, it's very hard to implement something like auto pause in a reliable and predictable way. So it's not something that I think is ruled out, but because it's very challenging, it's not something that people have attempted in a while either. And there were at least one previous attempt which people backed away from after realizing that it's really way more complicated than we thought it was. So it's unclear whether this will happen in the near future.
Sounds good. If there is a discussion happening on an issue or a mailing list, can you just put it on the chat?
If I can find the original proposal, which I think is closed now, and I believe might have been in the old format, I'll try to ping SIG Apps with it. But yeah, sure.
So one of the things that might be a good idea to do here, if folks are looking for contributions, is we talked a little bit about doing this, and we talked about it with stateful sets, and then there's deployments in different ways, figuring out where we can get these kinds of details into the documentation or where it goes. I know the docs folks are looking at restructuring the docs to try to make it a little bit better, but even as they're doing that, and that's something, if you're curious and you weren't here last week, last week we talked about it. This is something we should probably get into the documentation somewhere. So if it's not already there and you're interested in contributing something, docs are a pretty good way to go. Did anybody else have anything else with Canary deployments they wanted to talk about? All right, if there are, please go ahead and bring it up on the mailing list and we can keep this going or bring it up again. So with that, I'd like to move to the next item on the agenda, which we have Dan here from the CNCF to talk about. The CNCF is organizing a certified Kubernetes application developer curriculum, training, and certification process. It'll be kicking off around KubeCon. And Dan, I see, are you still on?
I sure am, thanks.
All right, the floor is yours. You got about 15 minutes.
Oh, that's a lot. I'm hoping to only need about 3 here. But
All
if
right.
folks could click that slides link that I have in the notes, and I'll paste it into chat as well here.
Would you like me to share your slides for you?
Yeah, that'd be great if you don't mind.
All right, just a moment.
Or folks can just pop it up here. So I think hopefully most people are familiar with CNCF. We're the nonprofit software foundation that hosts Kubernetes and a number of other projects. Our parent, the Linux Foundation, has an internal training group that we built out over the last several years that has a very successful training for Linux sysadmins, for OpenStack, for Cloud Foundry, and then we just launched the Kubernetes certified Kubernetes administrator a month ago. So if you go to slide 2, you can see that the model here is that we pick a topic and then we pull together a group of experts and jointly design a curriculum. That curriculum is open source. We then do a free intro course through our partnership with edX, which is the MIT online training group, and we've gotten tons of excitement and energy through that. Like folks from 141 different countries have signed up for the Kubernetes one. We then do a paid training course, $299, that is tied to the curriculum, and then an exam. And the key idea here is that the exam is not a multiple choice, but it actually gives you a command line and requires you to go in the CKA case to configure a Kubernetes cluster. So that's also $300, although when you get the two together, it's $500. So slide 3, the key thought is that we're assembling the industry experts, but we're not actually trying to define the exam or, what the topic should be. We're really looking for the group of people who come together on it to do that. We also fund the development. Then the internal LF training group designs it using some outside experts and develops and runs the training exam. And then we do encourage third-party training partners. So the idea is that we kind of, the curriculum's open source, the exam is kind of monopoly, but the training, we encourage lots of folks to compete with us and then offer the coupons for the exam at the end of it. So on slide 4, the exam has gone quite well so far. There've definitely been some teething issues on it. It was built around 1.6. We are now funding it to do 4 updates a year to match Kubernetes releases. And in particular, it had some canonicalisms that people were not happy with. And so those are being removed. And it's about 2 weeks away from having the 1.8 version of it. And then we hope the future versions are even closer in on the release of Kubernetes. We're going to do a Chinese translation of all of the text. There's a ton of interest in this in China. And then right now the exam is just more stressful and difficult than it needs to be because it's 4 hours long. And so we're working to figure out how we could cut out questions without changing the results. Slide 5 is a little bit on our aspirations, where we would like to offer a whole set of add-on exams, particularly once you've become a certified Kubernetes administrator. And there's now an analogy here to scuba diving, where just like you can do deep dive or wreck dive or underwater photography, that you could imagine having things that cover configuring Envoy or Istio or Prometheus or Fluentd or security or networking or all sorts of other aspects of it. But the first part that we'd like to start on is slide 6, the certified Kubernetes application developer. And I think the headline point that I'd like to make to this group is that we feel like there is a natural complement to the administration exam, that in any given company, you're probably only going to have 2 or 3 people who really should become CKAs, but you would then correspondingly have dozens or even hundreds of different developers who are going to be creating applications that deploy onto that Kubernetes application. And so this has been the case with OpenStack, with Cloud Foundry, with others, that we think that there's a natural kind of application developer exam that necessarily should be easier, shorter, not as involved as the Kubernetes administrator point. And then the other kind of headline point here is that, yes, this area is changing dramatically right now. And so I can easily imagine that every 3 months, there will be much, much more churn in this content, in the curriculum, the exam, et cetera, than there is in the certified Kubernetes administrator exam. But we're okay with that. We're willing to fund the effort. We think the experts we pull in are willing to keep this up to date. And so, hypothetically, if 9 months or 12 months from now, building a Helm chart is no longer best practice, and instead there's a standard tool, not that's universal, but 70 or 80% of people are instead using that tool that then produces the Helm chart, then great, let's change this. There's absolutely no lock-in on any of this content, but the goal would be that for each 3 months that we issue this, it would represent something of the best practices today. And so you can see some things in here, like how to design 12-factor apps and when you should sometimes want to break out from the guardrails. That should not actually age. The Prometheus metrics and alerts is probably pretty stable, as are, I think, the cron jobs and stable sets. But I do want to emphasize these bullet points, there's 6 of them here, were just my guess at what it should be to sort of calibrate things. It really is up to the group of experts to decide what they think should be in it. And so then that's slide 7 that we're looking for curriculum design volunteers, and slide 8 shows the schedule that you arrive 2 days early for KubeCon. And then Monday and Tuesday, we go through and come up with what we call a job task analysis, where we talk about what people should know who are in this space. And then after KubeCon on Saturday and Sunday morning, we actually write the exam questions, which are designing how you would have to spin something up. And the concept, at least, is that we would give you a JavaScript application or a PHP application or something, and then you would have to configure it and get it deployed out onto a real cluster. And there might be some port mapping or other sorts of issues that come up. But the goal would be that whatever we ask people to do wouldn't actually require you to be familiar with JavaScript applications or PHP or whatever it is, that it would be more universal than that. So that's the background. It's completely open to anyone to participate. I'd love to get engagement from this group, and I believe Matt has already volunteered. There's no cost involved other than obviously all of your time is extremely valuable. So we respect the effort for people who are willing to contribute here. And I'll stop and take any questions or accusations.
Is there anybody who'd be interested in contributing to this stuff, either at Austin, or if you're not able to come to Austin, outside of it?
I got to say the outside of it's just a tiny bit problematic, and I do really appreciate that limits things. But we've just found with these groups, I mean, again, just being really bluntly here, the OpenStack effort extended like 12 months because they were trying to do it on weekly conference calls. And for Kubernetes, we got all the people in the same room over 2 weekends and accomplished more faster.
Yeah, but as I understand it, with the operators, there was a lot of pain with that operator survey, and as you pointed out here earlier, that some chunks of it are having to be rewritten because of that. And so it might be useful to do some of it, a bunch of it face-to-face, and some of it outside of that to try to avoid some of that first uptake pain.
Okay, so I'm open to that. The other, yeah, the sort of specific thing that I would be thrilled to essentially allow anyone in this group be an alpha tester of it. And at the moment when it's totally feasible to make changes, to come in and say, no, you've effed up these 3 things and this doesn't make sense, etc.
Hi, from the Kubernetes Certified Administrator syllabus and the one that we saw for the application developer, there seems to be some sort of overlap. So what are the plans? I mean, are we going to remove any traces of application-related maintenance in the CKA and keep everything in this certification, or how is the plan going forward?
The aspiration, of course, I mean, we're looking to these expert groups to recommend it, but is that the CKA is what an administrator needs to go, no, not an application developer, the person whose job it is to take care of the cluster. And the CKAD is what an application developer needs to know, who doesn't actually isn't responsible for the cluster. Now, in a lot of companies, it would be the same person, or startups, it would be the same person would want to know both. And so there's certainly no sort of limit to it, but I'd expect some small amount of overlap, but not huge amounts.
Okay, because I remember taking questions like create a job, create a deployment, do rolling updates for the deployment, and things like that. So would that be removed eventually in the administrator certificate, isn't it?
I mean, I think an administrator needs to know how to do deployments just to be able to answer questions from others. So I don't know that they're necessarily keep in mind sort of best practices on applications design. I guess let me change my answer. I'm really looking to the expert groups for both projects, which are designed to run in parallel, to make their recommendations on what the curriculum should be. It seems to me like there's naturally going to be some overlap.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
So hey guys, it's Scott again. Quick question, Dan. What tooling are you using for contributing to the curricula?
I mean, it's literally an in-person process over 2 days that gets done on Excel spreadsheets and Google Sheets and stuff. I guess there's an ongoing working group that then refines it and such, but I mean, again, somewhat bluntly, we're not opening it up for everyone to evaluate it, partly because we don't want to have the backlogs of it be, the list of answers that you need to go do. So we actually require all the participants to sign something saying no, they won't share it with their colleagues and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I do understand that I mean, showing up early or late in Austin, and by the way, you can do one half or the other half, so you don't have to do both, is a meaningful obligation, that it does set up a meaningful hurdle here. But the best thing that I can say for it is we literally have 13 different people from 13 different companies that are engaged in this, that are all active in the Kubernetes community. And my hope is that together that they would be able to agree on essentially what the common ground is, not necessarily the ideal or anything. And then, I mean, my other pitch for it is that we will iterate it over time, and it hopefully improves rather than worse.
For those 13 folks who signed up, or for anybody else who gets involved, is there a way to look at who actually does the operation of applications in Kubernetes? And I say that because, if I'm being very honest here, there are a number of folks who work on building Kubernetes and are interested in operating Kubernetes itself, who tend to see viewing how you operate applications a little bit different than a lot of the things that we see in practice. And so I'm curious how much of it is actually people who, if there's a way to say, okay, these folks really do have experience operating applications in production.
I mean, I'm not really in a position to sort of ask them you have to answer these 6 questions correctly in order to prove that you deserve to be here. I will say that I'm familiar with most of the people on the list, and the vast majority are consulting companies or, the consulting parts of other companies that are engaged with real enterprises today. And so I think it's totally valid to say, yeah, but they're teaching them the wrong thing, or, their proposed solutions are not ideal or something. But again, the goal is that the wisdom of crowds here by bringing a group of them together that they could agree on the common subset.
Okay.
I mean, all of our time is incredibly valuable. So it's a little hard for me to imagine people signing up just to propose something really impractical. But I do want to emphasize that I see this area as even more up in the air than the CKA curriculum. So I think I understand some of the sensitivities around it.
And Matt, is what you meant in part because the actual packaging of applications within Kubernetes has been a pretty rapidly changing space?
Part of it is the rapidly changing space. Part of it is just opinions on how you do things. And we are a community with a lot of varying strong opinions. And how do we make sure that one strong opinions does not dominate something over somebody else's? That's a definite concern for me right now, given the wide variety of opinions in the application space. Nobody's
That's
really
a good
shown up
point,
with a
how
winner.
not to crystallize that holy war into a certification.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I do want to commend Matt here, where I think he's making by far the biggest way to make sure we don't F up the process. He's going to show up at least for I think you're doing the question part of it.
We'll see what I can show up for. I don't know yet.
Okay, great. But
don't worry, I won't be quiet. I'm never quiet. Who knows me knows that. All right. Well, with that, folks, I'm going to do a quick time check to say it's past time. And so thank you, everyone, for coming and the lively conversations we've had today. And we'll see you all next week.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, folks.